Hello, Wargamers! Welcome to the show. Tonight we have a special guest, a gamer who has been at it since the 80s and is getting back into the scene more recently. You may have seen his fascinating video where he plays out a dungeon delve using cards and a selection of random event charts. Please welcome the Pink Phantom as we discuss his Dungeon Raid game, the solo Wargaming guide, the Dice Legions game, and his unique interpretation of the Campaign Carnival scenario number 1. Welcome, Pink Phantom.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
The way we normally do this, and I think most podcasts do, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the gaming and wargaming scene?
Sure. I started off in the basically the mid '80s. Back then, I was in, we called it junior high. I think that most people call it middle school now. About sixth grade, seventh grade. I started with we started with the Red Box BX Dungeons and Dragons, and moved on to AD&D fairly quickly after that. And then when I got into high school, I started playing more board games. Started off with Axis and Allies, and moved on into Avalon, a lot of the Avalon Hill games, Battle of the Bulge, Gettysburg, games like that, Civilization. And then through that at time and into my college years, I started playing more war games on the computer, on and on like that. And then finally kind of tailed off a little after college for a while. You know, gaming groups break up, did some solo play, and just kind of got out of the hobby. And then probably the last 5 to 10 years, I've been getting back into it, and really lately, thanks to channels like the Joy of Wargaming and your channel, I've been looking into miniatures wargaming, which I hadn't really gotten into that much before. So something new to check out as well as digging into old hobbies.
All right, cool. That's yeah, I think that mirrors a lot of people's progression, especially people that got started back in the day.
Yeah,
Um, especially when we were younger, because at least in my experience, the miniature wargaming part of it in the early 80s, mid 80s was dominated by old dudes playing Civil War games. And they
yeah,
were big and they looked complicated and they're walking around with clipboards and all these charts, and it looked intimidating. Like for myself, I didn't get into miniatures gaming until the early 90s, and I started with Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and it kind of took off from there because I've played a whole slew of different rule systems, and I'm in love with miniature gaming myself. And so, like you, I just got back into it a little bit the last few years, and now I am enthralled with the idea of campaigns. I had purchased the solo wargaming guide a couple years ago when I was living in Maryland, because I had no one to game with, and I was trying to figure out a way to play miniatures games by myself. And it wasn't until recently, however, that the whole idea of where this information came from uh, piqued my interest, and I've been doing a lot of research. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the solo wargaming guide because you mention it in your blog post about the Campaign Carnival. And I wanted to, I guess, first off, that blog post is fascinating, and I urge everyone to read it. It's at the blog Nerdist Interruptus. You'll find it on Blogspot. But tell us a little bit about your blogging and about your YouTube channel and what you think you're going to do with that.
yeah. Well, I was with the blog. It was something that I put together a few years ago, and I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with it. I covered a lot of the content ended up back then being from in football games, which I go to with my dad. He was an alumni. He's an alumni there. Just general nerd commentary, but being online, a lot of that nerd commentary seemed to be what people didn't like, and I just I don't go down that road. I just talk about the things I like, maybe things I'd like to see, and it was something I didn't really know what I was doing with it, so it kind of phased out. But when the carnival came open, I said, "This is a great way to document what I'm doing with this carnival with these miniatures war games." And so I think that's probably something I'm going to try to continue to do with that is I just kind of explore that side of the hobby. And the YouTube channel, again, it's the same thing. It's one of those things where I got a YouTube channel joined YouTube just to watch YouTube. And I'd post things here and there, but didn't have any really clear idea what to do with it. And again, I was operating on trying to put together my little dungeon raid mini game. And once I had it kind of figured out, I guess a beta of it, I just wanted to show the process out there to show how I went through with it. And I'll probably keep doing that too. And it'll be a mix and match of what I'm up to, what I'm thinking about, and that kind of thing.
Awesome. So yeah, so Dungeon Raid, I'm really interested in that. Like, where did you get the inspiration for that? How did you put that together? You know, what made you put the idea of the cards and the random tables in integrating that dungeon delve with the campaign that Joy of Wargaming has going on?
Yeah, when Joy of Wargaming got to the point where they were going to be raiding a dungeon in game, I said that's something interesting. That's something I'd like to see. How would that work out? And my original inclination was to break out the AD&D First Edition Dungeon Master's Guide and roll up a dungeon and roll up a party and do it that way. And I got to looking at just the random dungeon bits it had, and it didn't seem like it was it kind of showed its age. I said, plus there's got to be a way to do it kind of a quicker process. This is kind of an adjunct to the campaign war game, and it's not something you'd want to spend 6 or 10 or 12 hours that sometimes a good dungeon delve will take when you're doing it with a party on the table. And so I just started thinking about cards. I had an old deck of cards and started picking up, and I said, how can this work out? And at this point, I honestly, several people have asked me, and I'm still not sure exactly what my thought process was that led to it. But just came up with an idea of exploration and obstacles and treasure, and that just seemed to suit like a 3-card setup. And I played through it a bunch of different ways before I ended up with what I did.
Okay, well, it's funny that you say that because I mean, like exploration, obstacles, and treasure, that's literally the entire point of a dungeon raid. And so I think it's fascinating that you decided to go ahead and detail those and it makes it after that, I think it would probably have it gone very quickly for you because once you separated it out into those categories, then you just have to make a column of exploration notes, a column of various obstacles, and a column of various treasures, and then assign them to the suits and the numbers. Is that kind of how that went?
Yep, that's basically how it went.
Right, awesome. And yeah, I'll tell you what, I watched that video and I was literally on the edge of my seat because I hadn't seen anything like that, played out in live time like that. And I thought it was really, I don't know, I was floored. And I think that we need more innovative mechanics like that we can bolt on to existing games.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
The way they did it in the old days, because that's exactly what, when you think about the origin of Dungeons and Dragons, it started as an add-on to the chainmail game and a way for Dave Arneson to elaborate the detailed type of game and the specialized form of the Braunstein that he was putting together. And then when they wrote those rules, they're like, okay, well here's the rules for role playing, and here's the rules for the fantasy things. And if you want to fight, here use chainmail. And if you go out into the wilderness, here's this Avalon Hill game called Outdoor Survival, and use that for your outside.
Right.
It fascinates me how these things were just bolted together, and I find it very, very interesting because myself, I took 20 years off from role playing and played miniatures. And when I came back to it, I was astonished by the newer edition and how literally everything is based on, rolling a d20 versus a target number. And that's all it is. That's the whole game. The whole game is just roll the d20.
I think a lot of people, especially when they're first getting into the hobby, if they're coming from from just a regular game of some kind. You're playing a sport, or you're playing a board game like Monopoly or Risk, or even something like Axis and Allies or some of the Avalon Hill war games. It's, these are the rules, and this is what you do. And, the miniatures game hobby and the RPG that spun off of it, it's, people don't realize that it's a lot about adapting and changing and making the game work for you instead of you working to do the game exactly right.
And there's also a difference from sports and from board games in that there's a referee who's there to not only, adjudicate conflict, but is there to, create that fog of war, create that sense of mystery, uh, and then throw obstacles up in front of you when you're trying to, move along whatever path you've set for yourself.
Right. Yeah. And that's something that I think that gets kind of glossed over sometimes when people talk about new games and old games, because they look at the old games as what's this static thing that people just, you do it this one way and that's it. But that's not the way they did it. They were constantly changing stuff. Their game
Right.
was their game even yeah,
Yeah.
their game was
And
very different from the 1970s when they started doing it to the 1980s and onward, when Wizards scooped up the rights to D&D. The game had changed both in terms of the published game and very much so, I'm sure, in terms of the game that the originators of the game were playing.
right, right. And also the demographic of the players had changed, as well as just the basic opportunity, not opportunity, the basic interpretation of what the game was. It's completely transformed from being a miniatures game into something else altogether.
Oh yeah.
But that leads us back around to why I started up the Campaign Carnival, because I wanted to dig into some of these older guides and older books of directions that explained how to create these miniatures campaigns and how did that influence the people that created the role-playing games. And so that's where the Campaign Carnival comes in, and that's also where the Solo Wargaming Guide comes in. Now, where did you first encounter the Solo Wargaming Guide?
I first encountered it, well, like you, I was looking for resources for solo gaming, and I ran into it. I think it was probably just a link, a suggested link to when I was for something else I was looking at on Drive Through RPG. I ran into it there, and that was where I bought it. I bought the digital version and looked through it and everything. And it was one of those things where I have bought way too many games on Drive Through RPG and related sites. And so you look at it and you set it aside and maybe you forget about it. And then when I saw it on Joy of Wargaming, when he was starting up his campaign, chainmail campaign, I said, "Wait, I have that book. Let me take another look at that book." So that was really how I got back into the solo wargaming guide, was through the Joy of Wargaming channel.
Awesome. And then where did you find out about the the Dice Legions game that you used to interpret your battle for scenario one?
It was a suggested group to join on Facebook, actually, because I belong to a lot of groups about wargaming and just gaming in general on there. And so I said, Dice Legions, let's have a look at that, because the idea of using that system uses dice as the miniatures, and it's like that's that's a great idea. I mean, if you don't want to have a bunch of miniatures to store and paint, or if you don't have room for it, or if you just want to try something different, that's you buy a bunch of dice, you've got them in a box or a bag or something, and you've got some rules and you've got a war game. I thought that was a neat idea.
Yeah, definitely. I'm fascinated by the idea of it, and I'm going to have to order that. But I'm going to hold off because there are seven different campaign and rule books that I need to review and evaluate while I'm executing the Campaign Carnival. So no more new rules for the time being. Um, but I'm going to pick your brain about this. So, how does Dice Legions handle uh, the army? Or is there an army list for Dice Legions?
The well the game they've got out, it's actually still, it's one of those things where it's kind of still in development. He was the gentleman who started, I think his name is Adam Dobbins. He started it and started the Facebook group as development, and then either late last year or early this year he got a deal with Modiphius Entertainment to finish development and publish it. And then when the war between Russia and Ukraine started, they put out a version, sort of a first version that they called Dice Legion's Roll versus Evil Edition, and the proceeds are going to help Ukrainian refugees. And so that's actually the version I have, and it comes with essentially two sides to play and a list of essentially what constitutes an army for those two versions. But on the Facebook group, he's always throwing out different ideas for different factions and different scenarios.
Okay. And so, how does that work in terms of different types of forces? Do you use like different colored dice or different size dice, or how does that work?
Yeah, the idea is to use different colored dice essentially for the forces, and then within each force for the different types of units. So you would have they have sort of little cards that say what the unit abilities are, and so you could put a dice of the proper color on each unit on the card so that you can recognize it on the board.
Okay. Okay. And I see here in your blog post that says you violated a prime principle of gaming. Don't tinker before you've even tried the game. So Dice Legions does not have a leader rules or morale rules.
No, no, it's pretty much, it looks like it's pretty much a stand up fight type game where the forces go in and they're essentially competing over the battlefield. But there's no morale, there's no facing, there's no leaders. There's what they call special units, which are represent typically the regular units will be represented by D6s with pips because they treat the pips as individual soldiers within that unit. And then they have some special units that you'd use like your D&D dice for, that have numbers on them, and that represents their health points for just that unit. But they don't, from the rules they have out now, don't have anything where those units are treated as leaders and give any kind of boost to the regular soldier. So it was something I was trying to figure out on the fly to help give the side that was trying to attack the units, and if either not let them escape by destroying them or chasing them off the board in a different direction, give them an opportunity to do that. Otherwise, the only avenue they would have had to victory points was simply destroying units.
Okay. And then how does it work in terms of movement? Do you use a ruler? Does it have a grid?
It is a ruler. Each unit has a base movement rate. The ones in the version they have out now are either 3 inches or 4 inches, and so it's inch based.
Okay. And how does shooting work?
Shooting is you're going to roll a number of six-sided dice equal to the number of troops that are remaining in that unit. So if it's full strength, you'll have six, and each unit has a level that it range for those that do have a range, and melee. It hits on usually it's a 4+ or a 3+.
Okay. And so when you were setting this up, then how did you count your forces? Because I see that you used the solo wargaming guide to determine the number of soldiers available to each of the baronies in the scenario. And then how did you decide that 2,160 goblin drake riders equaled 18 dice?
I decided that I was going to instead of treating it like a unit with individual soldiers, I was going to use the 1 to 20 ratio. So each pip was equal to 20. So a full dice was equal to 120. I just divided the numbers.
Oh, okay. Okay, so each die then represented 120. Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And then did you use the dice themselves as the units, or did you group dice so that, for instance, you'd have 4 dice that made up a, I guess, for lack of a better term, a stand?
No, what I did was I treated each dice as a stand. I was basically saying, okay, the pips are the figure. It's one a 1 to 20 ratio for each figure. The pips are the figures, and the individual die is the stand. That's why I ended up with so many dice. That was one of the things at the end. I said, yeah, I probably should have used either a different ratio or something else so that I didn't have so many dice on the board.
Okay. Do you think it would have played out differently if you had grouped the dice into larger units?
It it would have, because the system is an activation based system. You have so many activations. They treat 18 dice as an army, and 6 activations per turn for each side. So, if I had fewer dice but kept the activations the similar or the same, I would have been able to move more of the troops around with each activation.
Yeah. I'd actually, this sounds really fascinating, and I'd love to see you do a let's play video, and watch you play the game. But you don't have to do that. That's fine. I understand. But yeah, if you get some time and you've got the motivation, I'd love to see that. Or do you know if anyone does this on
There
YouTube? Has anyone got a
there
let's
is
play?
there is someone on YouTube that has done some Dice Legion stuff. I can't think of the name right off the bat. I'll have to send you the information. I'll pull because I see it posted in the Facebook group all the time. They'll have a video every once in a while.
Okay, so for the campaign carnival, you have your units that you determined some of them were scattered, some were injured, and some were actually killed. So, what kind of thoughts do you have in your head about what might happen in future battles and how the relative strength of the two baronies might be might be impacted by these casualties?
Yeah, well, it didn't end up with a ton of killed units, so I think the relative balance is still fairly intact. I think actually the Barony A side, the one that had the most, the one that was fleeing, actually ended up with the fewer overall killed, and maybe a similar number of casualties. So I think it'll basically depend on what percentage of the total forces are available as to who has a numerical advantage. I don't think either side has gained a a distinct advantage in terms of, okay, you took a lot of hits, a lot of kill. We killed a lot of your guys. We injured a lot of your guys. So you're going to be at a distinct disadvantage the next time we meet on the battlefield. So I think there's some more fairly even fights coming up in terms of the carnival.
And then also regarding Dice Legions and how the movement works and how that you don't have facings or anything like that. Do you think that maybe we should come up with some better rules? Because I know that when I put the situation together, I was thinking of, your typical war games such as, Warhammer 40K or Chainmail, um, or even Battle System and things like that, where the units have a facing and flank attacks are a thing, and movement is modified by turning or changing facing or that sort of thing. Because I ran into the same problem because I used Age of Penda for my game, and that doesn't have a facing either. And
Right.
it's a grid system, and your troops can only move from one grid to one other adjoining grid square. I had to improvise on the fly, so I've been thinking about changing that. Did you have any thoughts? I know you said that you were thinking about the no-go zone between the opposing armies and how you might change that. Did you give that any further thought?
I haven't really. I after I published the blog, I looked back on it a few days later. I was like, maybe I overreacted a little, just at the end of battle. I was trying to get the blog out because I think at the end, I think a lot of the way things went wrong for the, I forget which side was which. Side B, I think, was the one with the most. I think reason a lot of the reason the things went wrong for them was just because the dice didn't didn't treat them very well on the battlefield. They had a lot of, and some of that was related to the rules I tacked on, and some of that was just in the general way the battle went. And that's the fortunes of war, I guess. But I think, if it's a situation where we need morale or facing or stuff like that, it may not Dice Legions may not be the best system for that kind of a battle. But I thought the scenario was very interesting because you don't see a lot of, okay, well, you're basically outnumbered 2-1 and you're trying to get your guys off the board and these guys are just looking to sweep you up. So I thought that was a very interesting type of scenario because most of them you see they're usually, they're point balanced and they're balanced up and you're just fighting it out until somebody gets forced off the field or gets destroyed.
Right. I'll be the first to say that in my, many, many, many years of playing miniatures games, I've always hated that, you know, equal number of points value, and you line up your forces and then you just push them into each other and see what, whoever rolls the highest, or
Right.
whoever, you know, in terms of, if you're thinking in terms of Warhammer 40K, who spent the most money on their models to get the newest, hottest thing. um, I've always loved the narrative style gaming where, the who wins is based on victory conditions as opposed to, well, I killed all your guys, or I chased all your guys off the board, or what have you.
Right. Yeah.
That I think that's just more interesting, and it brings out more, cerebral style gaming, in terms of getting people to really think about, what do I need to do to achieve these end game conditions, as opposed to just charge and destroy.
Sure, exactly. And that's something I've seen play out on the campaign on the Joy of Wargaming's channel is, sometimes when you do that, you get these kind of lopsided forces, and how can you overcome that? And if not gain a victory, at least not lose the war because you lost a battle. So that's definitely a big difference between doing something on a campaign type level and just here's some points, we're rolling up a battle, which can be fun. I mean, especially with the popularity of skirmish style games these days, I think we see that's very something that people look for where they can get something on the board and play and have a fair chance to win or lose. But the campaign has got a different kinds of challenges, and sometimes you just end up with something lopsided and you just have to live with it.
Right. Exactly. Now I'm looking at the thing here too, and you say that in Dice Legions that the forces are set up as an even matchup of 18 dice per army with 6 activations per army. But with
Right.
the forces you fielded, it said you had Airland had 12 activations. So did that mean there were 36 dice for that side, or 36 pips?
I don't. Let's see. What was the exact number? It was. I kind of. What I did was I looked at the system and it the way it's set up in the system they put out. They just have 2 even armies and it's 6 activations per and it's 18 dice each one. And I think I looked at the total dice and I just basically did, well, okay, you get 1 activation for every 3. So that was how I arrived at the number of activations I had for each side.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
I
because
just
here.
divide.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just when I figured out what percentage of units they had and how many dice that represented for those units, and then I just said divide by 3, and there you go.
Yeah, because you've got 3,780 Gatorkin mercenaries that you decided was going to be 32 dice. Um,
Right. Yeah.
so I'm just going to throw this out there. For the next battle, would you consider maybe grouping those together, or maybe like taking maybe, or maybe perhaps taking those same ratios and bringing the 2 core army lists down to 18 dice, so that, for instance, you have one army in the barony of Mireland here, and there's another army there, and there's a third army over here, because you've got what, 50, 60 dice. You could have three complete armies plus, and then use one of those smaller armies in the next battle. And then you could
Yeah,
use the two remaining armies to either bolster or replace any casualty.
yeah. Well, I mean, that's certainly something to consider. That's something I'm going to have to pare down once we see how things, what kind of scenario comes up with the next go round.
Because I'm fascinated by the idea that you literally took all of the forces that were available to each barony and threw them together, and or I should say, threw them at each other. That didn't occur to me to approach it like that, and so I think it's totally fascinating. So awesome, cool. I think I've covered all of my questions. Did you have any questions for me, or anything else you wanted to throw out there?
No, not really anything off the top of my head. I really like what you've got going here, though. But so I'm really looking forward to the way it progresses through the rest of the summer.
All
You can
right,
definitely count me in.
awesome, awesome. I'm looking forward to it. And then I have another question too. Would you be interested in perhaps having a chat later, off not off the record, about maybe figuring out a way to incorporate a little bit of the dungeon raid rules into one of these scenarios?
But yeah, that definitely is a conversation worth having. I think absolutely.
Because I think we could make one of these or two of these battles very, very interesting if we stirred things up a little.
Oh yeah, that's
Um,
always fun stirring stuff up.
awesome. Well, hey, thanks for being on the show tonight. I really appreciate it. It's been very educational. I'm definitely going to check out Dice Legions. If anyone else who's listening has played that game or has any information or any ideas about it, go ahead and leave a comment below. Um, we will round up some links and add those in the description as well, so that you can do more research on the game for yourself. Pink Phantom, have a
Yes,
good evening, and thanks for being on the show.
thank you for having me. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to War Game Culture. Links to all of the games and books that we discussed in this show are down in the description below. Please hit like and subscribe. We look forward to talking to you again soon.